Yates Woods Burton was born on March 20th, 1865, in Wayne County, Kentucky, right at the end of the Civil War. He was the son of William W. Burton and Rebecca Talitha Fitzgerald Burton. He was the middle child of 9 children. Yates grew up to be a very handsome man, as you can see in his photograph. The day after Valentine's Day in 1887, 21-year-old Yates Burton married Laura Green Halcomb Burton in Pulaski, Kentucky. Yates was 21 and his bride was 17. Together, they had 14 children. The oldest was Debbie Burton, which will be a pivotal character in this story. Their daughter Clodie had died as a child in 1899, and triplet boys were also born and died in March 1902 on the 11th of the month. The youngest was Laura Yates Burton, who was born in 1905, just before her mother died in the next year, 1906. After Laura passed away, Yates found himself the widowed father of Laura, who was still in diapers at 2 years old, Ernest, who was only 3, Angelina, who was 6, Clarence, who was 9, Lenny, who was 12, Nellie, 15, Oda, 17, Garville, 19, Orville, 20, and Debbie, the oldest, who married Henry Newton Hudson in 1903, a few years prior to her mom's death. The 9 children who remained at home needed a lot of care, and he needed to work to feed them, so Yates married a second wife, Sarah Elizabeth Taylor, shortly after Laura died. Sarah, the second wife, was younger than his first wife by 8 years, which made her 13 years younger than Yates. Together, Sarah and Yates had a daughter named Thelma Burton in 1912. What happened next shocked the family, the community, and catapulted the Burton name into the newspaper headlines. Yates and his son-in-law, Henry Newton Hudson, were engaged in the family farming business together. They had a falling out about the business and money, and something of a family feud created a spark, and that spark ignited the powder keg. To set the stage, in 1915, the United States stood on the edge of a changing world. Europe was already engulfed in the First World War. Although America had not yet entered the conflict, the effects were felt everywhere. Newspapers carried daily reports of battles overseas. Factories in northern cities expanded to meet the wartime demand. At home, President Woodrow Wilson oversaw a country in transition. Automobiles were becoming more common. Rural mail delivery was expanding, and telephones were slowly connecting communities that had once lived in near isolation. Yet for much of rural America, life still moved at the pace of the horse and the plow and the seasons. Kentucky in 1915 reflected this blend of old and new. The hills and valleys of Lincoln, Pulaski, and Wayne counties were dotted with small farms, tenant houses, and tight-knit communities where families often lived within a few miles of one another for generations. Roads were mostly dirt or gravel, and travel between counties could take hours by wagon or horseback. Huntinsville, Stanford, and the surrounding countryside were modest in population, with county seats rarely exceeding a few thousand residents. Most people farmed for a living, raising tobacco, corn, livestock, and orchard crops. Churches, schoolhouses, and general stores served as the social centers of rural life. Neighbors knew one another's families, reputations, and disputes, and news traveled quickly through the word of mouth long before it reached the pages of the Interior Journal or the Central Record. In this landscape of close connections and limited privacy, the killing of a man like Yates Woods Burton was not just a crime. It was a shockwave that moved through every ridge, hollow, and crossroads store in the region. The Hudson murder case, tried during a special term of the Lincoln County Circuit Court, created a great deal of excitement in Lincoln and Pulaski counties. It will be remembered that several months earlier, Yates Woods Burton traveled to the home of his son-in-law, Henry Hudson, near Houstonville, where he was killed. Burton's home was in Pulaski County, and the troubles arose over property the two men held in partnership. One eyewitness, besides Hudson's wife, was present that night, and by law, she could not testify because she was married to his son. That left the entire weight of the story resting on the shoulders of Burton's nephew, Grover Ard. From this point, the story shifts from a brief newspaper summary into the lived reality of a family tragedy that rippled across 3 counties. On that cold Sunday in early 1915, Yates Woods Burton set out from Wayne County with Ard at his side, his nephew. They carried bedding, provisions, and the quiet determination to settle unfinished business with Hudson. The two men jointly owned the farm where Hudson family lived, and tensions over money, debts, and the use of the house had been simmering for months. By the time Burton and Ard arrived at the farmhouse, the Hudson household was already in bed. Miss Hudson, Burton's daughter, opened the door to her father and uncle. They stepped into the front room, lit only by the glow of a small fire. Burton declined supper. He declined a bed. He said he had brought his own things and intended to settle the partnership accounts. He asked that the furniture in the room be moved so he could use the space. His daughter complied. From the adjoining room, Henry Hudson's voice cut through the quiet. He told Burton he was entitled to half the house and no more. What followed was a rapid escalation of anger. Insults were exchanged across the dark hallway. Both men had reputations that depended on who was telling the story. Some neighbors described Burton as dangerous when drinking. Others said he was peaceable and devoted to his children. Hudson was known as a hard-working man, but he too carried grudges. According to Grover Ard, Burton was sitting by the fire with a lantern at his feet. He picked it up and turned and bent to set it down, and in that moment, the first shot rang out. Burton staggered towards the doorway. A second shot followed. Ard eased him to the floor as he collapsed. Burton died without speaking a word. Hudson's version was starkly different. He claimed Burton was advancing towards him, reaching inside of his coat for a revolver he was known to carry. Hudson said he believed he was about to be killed and fired to save his own life. Afterward, he reloaded his pistol, saying he feared Ard might attack him next. The physical evidence offered no simple answers. One bullet entered Burton's chest and traveled downward. Another struck near the hip, possibly from behind. Undertakers and sheriffs disagreed on the direction of the wounds. Witnesses contradicted one another on whether Burton had been drinking, and whether Ard was intoxicated, and whether Burton had a reputation for violence or for peace. Over 100 witnesses were called. Farmers, neighbors, relatives, and curious onlookers crowded into the wooden benches of the courthouse. The trial became more than a legal proceeding. It became a public reckoning with the complicated legacy of a man whose life had touched so many. Some testified that Burton was a dangerous man when under the influence of liquor. Others insisted he was a devoted father, a respected neighbor, and a man who had worked hard for everything he owned. Testimony about Grover Ard's character was equally divided. Even the credibility of James Richards, a former son-in-law who claimed Hudson had once suggested they could profit from Burton's death, was challenged by his own relatives. In the end, the jury found Henry Hudson guilty of killing his father-in-law. He was sentenced to a term of 2 to 5 years in the penitentiary. Some newspapers called it a light sentence, but others reported the verdict and moved on. But for the Burton family, the consequences were lasting. A wife was left without her husband. 10 children were left without their father. A community was left with questions that would never fully be answered. The death of Yates Woods Burton marked a turning point in the story of the Burton family. It revealed the fragile balance between kinship and conflict, between the land and the legacy, between the public image of the man and the private struggles he carried. His life had been shaped by the rugged hills of Kentucky, by hard work, by ambition, and the complicated ties that bind families together. His death became a reminder of how quickly those ties can unravel. More than a century later, the echoes of that night still lingers in the records, in the land he once walked, and the stories passed down through generations. The murder of Yates Woods Burton is not just a chapter in a court ledger. It's a piece of family history that continues to shape the narrative of who the Burtons were and who they became.